The majestic Palace Hotel on Park Lane had witnessed many peculiarities during its distinguished 40-year history. But never had its impeccable staff encountered a guest room that appeared to have checked itself out, taking its occupant along in the process. It was this singular impossibility that would, before the week was through, require the particular expertise of a certain Belgian gentleman whose reputation for unraveling the threads of human deception was matched only by his appreciation for the precise workings of order and method. The evening had begun with such promise. The hotel's crystal chandeliered ballroom hummed with the refined chatter of London's social elite, gathered for the annual charity auction in aid of displaced European refugees. Among the glittering assembly, one figure commanded particular attention, the renowned antiquarian, Mr. Reginald Thornfield, whose recent acquisition of a legendary Byzantine manuscript had made headlines in both scholarly and financial circles. The manuscript, known as the Codex Aureus, was rumored to contain not merely ancient religious texts, but detailed maps leading to a lost treasure of incalculable value. Mr. Thornfield, a distinguished gentleman of 60 with silver hair and the bearing of one accustomed to moving in the highest circles, had taken the hotel's finest suite, room 507, for what he had described to the manager, Mr. Cornelius Whitmore, as a brief but crucial business arrangement. He had arrived that afternoon with a single leather valise and the mysterious manuscript case, declining all offers of assistance and specifically requesting that he not be disturbed under any circumstances until the following morning. The evening's festivities proceeded without incident. Mr. Thornfield made a brief appearance at the auction, bidding successfully on several minor pieces before retiring to his suite at precisely 10:30. The night porter, Thomas Hartwell, noted his passage through the lobby and observed that the gentleman seemed in excellent spirits, even humming a tune as he waited for the lift. At 11:47, according to the hotel's meticulous records, something unprecedented occurred. The pneumatic message system that connected each suite to the front desk delivered a brief note in Mr. Thornfield's distinctive copper-plate handwriting. Account settled. Please have luggage sent to Victoria Station. Left luggage office. R. Thornfield. Accompanying the note was the brass key to room 507. Mr. Whitmore himself examined the message with growing bewilderment. No guest had appeared at the front desk to settle an account. The night clerk, young Timothy Ashford, swore that no one had approached the reception area since Mr. Thornfield's earlier passage to the lifts. More puzzling still, the hotel's innovative electric indicator board, a modern marvel that displayed the occupancy status of each room, showed room 507 as vacant despite no record of the guest's departure. Most irregular, murmured Mr. Whitmore, adjusting his spectacles as he studied the message. Thomas, did you observe Mr. Thornfield leaving the hotel? The porter, a reliable man with 20 years of service, shook his head emphatically. No, sir. I've been at my post all evening. No one has passed through these doors since the last of the auction guests departed at 11:15. Driven by a growing sense of unease, Mr. Whitmore decided to investigate personally. Accompanied by Thomas and the assistant manager, Mr. Geoffrey Blackwood, he ascended to the 5th floor. The corridor was hushed, carpeted in deep burgundy that absorbed all sound. Room 507 stood at the far end, its door bearing the distinctive brass nameplate that marked the hotel's premier accommodations. Mr. Whitmore knocked gently. Mr. Thornfield, I do apologize for the disturbance, but there seems to be some confusion regarding your departure. Silence answered him. He tried the door handle. It turned freely. The chain was not engaged. What they discovered within defied all rational explanation. Room 507 was pristine, as if it had been prepared for a new guest rather than recently vacated by an existing one. The bed showed no signs of occupancy, its coverlet stretched tight and unmarked. The bathroom towels hung unused, the soap unwrapped. Most disturbing of all, Mr. Thornfield's leather valise had vanished, along with the priceless manuscript case that had never left his sight during his brief stay. Yet the room was not entirely empty. On the mahogany writing desk sat a single item that made Mr. Whitmore's blood run cold. Mr. Thornfield's gold pocket watch, its chain neatly coiled beside it, ticking away with mechanical precision. Engraved on its cover was the inscription, "To R.T. from the Royal Archaeological Society. In recognition of distinguished service, 1932. Impossible, breathed Mr. Blackwood, his usual composure shattered. A man cannot simply vanish from a locked hotel, leaving behind only his most precious possession. It was Thomas who made the discovery that transformed their bewilderment into horror. While the others examined the pristine suite, he had noticed that the service lift at the end of the corridor stood slightly ajar, unusual as it was typically secured after the evening's final rounds. When he pulled back the wooden gate, he found himself staring at a sight that would haunt his dreams for years to come. Mr. Reginald Thornfield lay crumpled among the starched white linens and towels, his distinguished features frozen in an expression of profound surprise. There was no blood, no obvious wound, but the unnatural angle of his neck and the glassy stare of his eyes left no doubt as to his condition. More chilling still was the complete absence of his luggage and the manuscript case, items that had seemingly vanished as completely as if they had never existed. "Dear God," whispered Mr. Whitmore, his face pale as the hotel linens. "How does a man check himself out of a hotel room and then end up dead in a service lift? And what has become of the Codex Aureus?" As the first light of dawn crept through the hotel's tall windows, Inspector George Meadows of Scotland Yard stood in the impossible emptiness of room 507, studying the solitary pocket watch and contemplating a mystery that seemed to mock the very foundations of logic itself. The hotel's guest registry showed Mr. Thornfield as having checked out at 11:47 p.m., yet his body suggested he had died sometime between midnight and 2 in the morning. His luggage had disappeared, his room had been mysteriously cleaned, and his most valuable possession, the Byzantine manuscript worth a king's ransom, had vanished without a trace. "It's as if the room itself committed the crime," Inspector Meadows muttered to his sergeant. "Checked the poor devil out permanently, and then tidied up after itself." Standing beside the inspector, Mr. Whitmore clutched the mysterious checkout note, his hands trembling slightly. "Inspector," he said quietly, "I fear we are dealing with something beyond the capabilities of ordinary investigation. This case requires a mind capable of seeing patterns where others see only chaos, of finding order in the midst of impossibility." Inspector Meadows nodded grimly. He had heard whispers in the corridors of Scotland Yard of a certain Belgian detective whose methods were as unconventional as they were effective. "Send a telegram immediately," he instructed his sergeant, "to Mr. Hercule Poirot. Tell him we have a room that has committed murder and checked itself out, and we need his little grey cells to solve the impossible." As the telegram was dispatched and the hotel staff gathered in hushed, worried clusters, the ticking of Mr. Thornfield's abandoned pocket watch continued its steady rhythm, counting down the moments until London's most famous detective would arrive to confront a mystery that challenged the very nature of reality itself. Chapter 2. The Gathering of Suspects. By 10 o'clock that morning, the Majestic Palace Hotel's elegant palm lounge had been transformed into an unlikely theatre of justice. Inspector Meadows, a man whose methodical nature had served Scotland Yard well for over 2 decades, stood beneath the fronds of an imported palm, surveying the assembled group with the practiced eye of one accustomed to reading guilt in the subtlest of expressions. The morning light, filtering through tall windows overlooking Hyde Park, cast long shadows across Persian carpets that had witnessed many secrets, but never, perhaps, one quite so perplexing as this. The official gathering. "Ladies and gentlemen," Inspector Meadows began, his voice carrying the authority of the Metropolitan Police, "I must inform you that no one, guest or staff, will be permitted to leave these premises until we have concluded our preliminary inquiries into the death of Mr. Reginald Thornfield." The announcement produced the sort of refined murmur one might expect from a gathering more accustomed to discussing the weather than confronting mortality. The hotel staff formed a nervous cluster near the windows, their usual professional composure strained by circumstances that no amount of training had prepared them to handle. Mr. Cornelius Whitmore sat with characteristic precision, his hands folded upon his knees as if maintaining perfect posture might somehow restore order to his disrupted establishment. His assistant, Geoffrey Blackwood, perched on the edge of a velvet chair, with the eager attention of a man anxious to demonstrate his usefulness. His sleek hair and faultless morning dress suggesting ambitions that extended well beyond his current position. Thomas Hartwell, the night porter, stood at respectful attention behind a potted fern, his cap held in weathered hands that spoke of decades in service. His bearing was that of a man who had learned to observe much while remaining nearly invisible, a quality that Inspector Meadows suspected might prove invaluable. At a writing desk by the window, young Timothy Ashford, the night clerk, fidgeted with papers that seemed to multiply under his nervous attention, ink stains on his cuffs betraying the tremor in his hands. The interested parties, among the hotel guests who had remained after the previous evening's charity auction, 3 individuals commanded particular attention. Lady Viola Martindale, whose charitable foundation had sponsored the gala, sat wrapped in a sable stole that seemed to create its own atmosphere of privilege and authority. Her cool blue eyes suggested both impatience with the proceedings and a keen curiosity about their outcome, the gaze of one accustomed to being informed rather than questioned. Dr. Sabine Vale presented a striking contrast to Lady Viola's aristocratic elegance. A woman of perhaps 35, she wore a severe black dress and wire-rimmed spectacles that emphasized the scholarly intensity of her expression. As a respected authority on Byzantine manuscripts, her public disagreement with Thornfield over the authenticity of the Codex Aureus had provided the more sensational newspapers with headlines about academic feuds and scholarly vendettas. The third member of this distinguished group was Mr. Julian Harcourt, a gentleman of indeterminate middle years whose expensive overcoat and polished boots spoke of considerable success in his chosen profession as an antiquities dealer. His manner was that of a man comfortable in the shadowy world, where priceless artifacts changed hands through discreet negotiations, what he preferred to term cultural mediation between serious collectors and worthy objects. The systematic inquiry. Inspector Meadows began his inquiry with characteristic thoroughness. "Mr. Whitmore, please confirm for everyone present the essential facts as we understand them." The hotel manager responded with the measured precision of one accustomed to presenting information in its most favorable light. "Mr. Thornfield arrived yesterday at 3 o'clock, taking our finest suite, room 507. He specifically requested that he not be disturbed under any circumstances. He made a brief appearance at the charity auction around 9:30, retiring to his suite at precisely 10:30. At 11:47, our front desk received a handwritten note, apparently from Mr. Thornfield, returning his room key and requesting that his luggage be sent to Victoria Station's left luggage office." "And the condition of the room when discovered?" Meadows prompted. Blackwood leaned forward eagerly. "That, Inspector, is what defies explanation. Room 507 was pristine, prepared as if for a new guest rather than recently vacated by an existing one. The bed showed no signs of occupancy, bathroom towels remained unused, every surface spotless. It was as if no one had ever stayed there, yet we know Mr. Thornfield occupied the suite for nearly 8 hours. Mrs. Bronwyn Llewellyn, the head housekeeper, had arrived with the silent efficiency that marked her profession. A compact woman with watchful grey eyes and hands that unconsciously sorted her keys like prayer beads, she provided crucial testimony about the evening's routine. "All floors were checked at 10 o'clock, Inspector. The Do Not Disturb sign was clearly displayed on room 507's handle," We never enter rooms so marked. At midnight, after the last of the auction guests had finally settled, I sent young Elsie Turner to perform a final corridor inspection. Elsie Turner, a fair girl of 19 who seemed to shrink under the collective gaze, stepped forward with obvious reluctance. "I didn't enter the room, sir," she said quickly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was only polishing the brass fixtures. Mr. Blackwood insists the 5th floor must gleam for morning guests. When I noticed the Do Not Disturb sign had been removed from room 507's handle, I thought perhaps the gentleman had retired for the evening and continued with my duties." The arrival of Hercule Poirot. It was at this moment that the lounge doors opened to admit a figure whose reputation had preceded him into the room like an invisible herald. Hercule Poirot, despite his diminutive stature, commanded immediate attention through the precision of his movements and the unmistakable intelligence that seemed to radiate from his carefully groomed person. His appearance caused a subtle shift in the room's atmosphere. Conversations ceased, postures straightened, and even Inspector Meadows seemed to stand a little taller. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his accented English carrying the authority of one accustomed to unraveling the most complex of human puzzles. "I've been summoned to investigate what appears to be an impossible crime. A man who vanishes from a locked room, leaving behind only his most precious possession, while his earthly remains are discovered in circumstances that mock the very foundations of logic." The Belgian detective's green eyes swept the assembled group with the methodical attention of a master cataloguer, noting details that others might overlook. The slight tremor in Lady Viola's gloved hands, the way Dr. Vale's fingers unconsciously adjusted her spectacles, the carefully controlled expression on Mr. Harcourt's face that suggested a man accustomed to concealing his thoughts. The physical evidence. Before we proceed with individual interviews, Poirot continued, "Permit me to share certain observations about the physical evidence. The room in question has been examined with the thoroughness that such mysteries demand." He produced a jeweler's loop from his waistcoat pocket, a gesture that seemed almost theatrical yet entirely practical. Mr. Thornfield's pocket watch, discovered upon the writing desk, tells us far more than merely the time of death. Observe how the chain is arranged, not carelessly dropped in haste, but coiled with deliberate precision. The watch itself stopped at 12:23 a.m., yet it was still ticking when discovered this morning. Someone wound that timepiece after Mr. Thornfield's death. The implications of this observation sent a visible chill through the assembled group. Inspector Meadows leaned forward. "You mean someone entered the room after the murder?" "Précisément, mon ami. Someone was indeed present in room 507 subsequent to Mr. Thornfield's demise. Whether this individual was the murderer returning to arrange evidence or an accomplice completing a carefully orchestrated deception remains to be determined." Setting the stage. Poirot's gaze returned to the suspects, each now acutely aware that they were being evaluated by a mind capable of perceiving patterns invisible to ordinary observation. The pneumatic message system that connects each suite to the front desk operates solely from within the rooms themselves, yet a message was sent after Mr. Thornfield's death. The service lift, normally secured after evening rounds, was found unlocked and containing our victim. Most intriguingly, luggage and a priceless manuscript have vanished as completely as morning mist. Lady Viola spoke first, her voice carrying the crisp authority of one accustomed to directing rather than being directed. "Mr. Poirot, I hope this matter can be resolved quickly. Poor Mr. Thornfield and I had our differences. He withdrew a promised auction piece in favor of some private sale, which disrupted our charity's arrangements, but surely personal disappointment hardly constitutes motive for murder." Dr. Vale's response was equally measured but carried the precision of academic training. "I had warned Lady Martindale about Mr. Thornfield's flexible ethics regarding provenance. The Codex Aureus contains interpolations that call its authenticity into question. We had arranged to meet this morning to compare scholarly notes, a meeting that will now, tragically, never occur." Mr. Harcourt's contribution was delivered with the smooth discretion of one accustomed to delicate negotiations. "I represent certain collectors, a Prussian industrialist, a South American gentleman of impeccable taste, who prefer privacy in their acquisitions. Mr. Thornfield had postponed our scheduled 11 o'clock meeting until this morning. My clients, while disappointed, are certainly patient when the object in question is irreplaceable." As the morning progressed and the assembled group settled into an uneasy waiting pattern, Poirot stood quietly observing, his mind already beginning to sort through the threads of motive, opportunity, and deception that would ultimately lead to the truth. The hotel's usual rhythm had been disrupted by the presence of death and mystery, creating an atmosphere where secrets long buried might finally surface under the relentless pressure of investigation. "Each of you will be interviewed individually," Inspector Meadows announced. "Until then, you will remain available to assist with our inquiries. I should mention that Scotland Yard has requested the assistance of Mr. Poirot, whose reputation for understanding the more complex aspects of human nature is well established." The stage was now set, the players assembled, each harboring secrets that would soon be exposed under the penetrating analysis of the world's most famous detective. In the elegant surroundings of the majestic Palace Hotel, where luxury and refinement usually mask the baser human emotions, a drama of greed, ambition, and murder was about to unfold, one that would test even Hercule Poirot's legendary powers of deduction. The morning sun cast long shadows across the hotel manager's private office as Hercule Poirot established his temporary headquarters for the investigation. With characteristic precision, he adjusted the angle of his chair by exactly 3 degrees, aligned his notebook parallel to the desk's mahogany edge, and arranged his pens in order of decreasing length. Inspector Meadows observed this ritual with patient understanding. He had learned that Poirot's methods, however unconventional, invariably produced results that eluded traditional police work. The porter's watchful eye. Thomas Hartwell entered with the measured tread of a man who had spent 23 years moving through hotel corridors without disturbing sleeping guests. His weathered face bore the marks of one who had learned to observe much while revealing little, a quality that Poirot immediately recognized as potentially invaluable. "Monsieur Hartwell," Poirot began, his green eyes studying the porter with jeweler-like intensity, "your position requires you to notice the comings and goings of guests while remaining nearly invisible yourself. Tell me, what did you observe of Monsieur Thornfield's behavior on the evening in question?" The porter's account proved methodical and precise. He had observed Thornfield's arrival at 3 o'clock, noting the gentleman's particular protectiveness regarding his leather valise and manuscript case. "He declined assistance with his luggage, sir, most unusual for a gentleman of his standing. Kept that case close as a mother with her babe." "And his demeanor during the evening?" "Cheerful enough at the auction, though he kept checking his pocket watch. Seemed anxious about the time. Left precisely at 10:30, humming some foreign tune." "Continental, I'd say." Hartwell paused, his brow furrowing with concentration. "There was one peculiarity, sir. As he waited for the lift, he mentioned expecting a visitor later, someone who would settle matters definitively, as he put it." Poirot's eyebrows rose fractionally. "A visitor? Yet you observed no one entering after 11:15. "That's correct, sir. I remained at my post throughout the night. The only unusual occurrence was around midnight when I heard the service lift operating, most irregular as it secured after evening rounds. Made quite a mechanical chime, it did." The night clerk's precision. Young Timothy Ashford approached like a schoolboy called to recitation, his ink-stained cuffs seeming to accuse him of some undefined neglect. Poirot softened his voice to encourage confidence. "The pneumatic message system, Monsieur Ashford. You received the note at 11:47 precisely." "Yes, sir. It arrives with a distinctive rattle and pop when the canister reaches the desk. I opened it immediately and found the key and note. The handwriting appeared to match the signature in our guest registry. I compared them specifically because the request seemed unusual. Poirot leaned forward with interest. You examined the message carefully. Ashford produced the folded paper from his waistcoat pocket. I preserved it for the police, sir. Hotel stationery from room 507, fresh ink, consistent handwriting throughout. Poirot studied the message through his jeweler's loupe, noting the formation of individual letters and pen pressure. Most illuminating, the handwriting shows no signs of distress, yet observe the spacing between words. Slightly irregular, as if the writer were copying from another source rather than composing original thoughts. The phrase, "account settled," is particularly curious, not the language a gentleman of Thornfield's education would typically employ. The housekeeper's domain. Mrs. Bronwyn Llewellyn entered with the quiet efficiency that marked her profession, her ring of keys making no sound despite their number. Her grey eyes held the sharpness of one accustomed to noticing details others might overlook. Madame Llewellyn, Poirot began respectfully, your inspection of the 5th floor. Please describe your observations with the precision your profession demands. The housekeeper's account was methodical. She had personally inspected each corridor at 10 o'clock, noting the "Do Not Disturb" sign properly positioned on room 507's handle. At midnight, young Elsie reported the sign had been removed, which she interpreted as the guest having retired. The condition of the room this morning. That, Monsieur Poirot, is what disturbs me most. Room 507 was too perfect, prepared as if for a new guest rather than recently vacated. We also discovered we were short 1 bath sheet and 2 towels from the 5th floor stores. Most irregular. Poirot's fingers drummed silently against the leather desk surface. The service lift, under normal circumstances. Locked at 10:30 each evening, sir. Only senior staff possessed keys, and they were all properly secured in my office throughout the night. Yet the lift was found unlocked this morning, containing... She compressed her lips, unable to finish. The ambitious assistant. Geoffrey Blackwood entered with eager attention, his perfectly groomed appearance suggesting ambitions extending well beyond his current position. Poirot noted the slight tremor in the man's hands as he reached for the offered teacup. Monsieur Blackwood, your familiarity with hotel operations is comprehensive, no? You understand the systems, the procedures, the possibilities. Indeed, sir. I've made it my business to understand every aspect of our operations. Mr. Thornfield seemed quite pleased with his prospects, mentioned that by morning he would be considerably wealthier. Your whereabouts during the critical hours between 11 and 2? Blackwood's response came perhaps too quickly. In my quarters on the 3rd floor, sir. I retired immediately after ensuring all auction guests had settled. Thomas Hartwell cleared his throat. Begging your pardon, sir, but I saw Mr. Blackwood near the service lift around 11:30, talking with Mrs. Llewellyn about some linen delivery. The assistant manager flushed slightly. Ah, yes, I had forgotten. A minor matter regarding additional towels for the auction guests. The chambermaid's senses. Elsie Turner came reluctantly, her fair features marked by obvious nervousness. Poirot gentled his voice still further. Mademoiselle, when you polished the 5th floor brass, did you notice any unusual scents? She blinked in surprise. Scent, sir? Perfume, tobacco, polish not your own. There was a strong beeswax smell near 507, heavier than what we typically use, and something sharp and foreign, like the soap in Turkish baths. Also a man's cologne, not English. Citrus-like it was. Poirot's eyes flickered with interest. You have an excellent nose, mademoiselle. Most valuable. Distinguished guests. Lady Viola Martindale received Poirot's questions with the cool authority of one accustomed to directing rather than being directed. Her sable stole seemed to create its own atmosphere of privilege. Your disagreement with Monsieur Thornfield? A dispute of expectations, she replied coolly. He had promised to lend a medieval reliquary for display, then reneged in favor of some private viewing. I conveyed my displeasure. He told me not to be provincial. She smiled without warmth. I do not murder for slights, Monsieur Poirot. Your movements last night? I retired at 11:30. My maid will confirm I rang for aspirin at 11:50. I slept poorly. Poirot noted the faintest ash upon her glove. You smoke occasionally, Lady Viola? She removed the glove with cool precision and set it aside, as if laying down a card in a game. Dr. Sabine Vale sat with scholarly intensity, her wire-rimmed spectacles emphasizing the precision of her gaze. Monsieur Thornfield and I disagreed not merely on the codex, but on the fundamental principles of academic honesty. The manuscript contains palimpsest leaves tampered with in the 19th century. He refused to acknowledge this because it would diminish its market value. Your whereabouts after the auction? In my room, reviewing notes. At midnight, I took a brief walk in the corridor for air. The evening had been rather stifling. I encountered no one. Mr. Julian Harcourt's smile belonged to a man who had often negotiated customs officials into believing the improbable. His expensive overcoat and polished boots spoke of considerable success in the shadowy world of antiquities dealing. Your clients desired the codex? Poirot inquired. My clients desire many things, Monsieur Poirot. They pay for authenticity, not legends. Thornfield postponed our 11 o'clock meeting until this morning. Sent a note at 9 saying he would see me at 10. Your evening activities? I dined late and returned to the hotel at 11. Sat with whiskey in the lounge until 1, then went out for a newspaper around 12:30. Thomas nodded reluctantly when Poirot glanced at him. He did go out for a paper, sir. Came back with the Star. Ah, Poirot observed, you have a taste for sensation rather than respectability. Most illuminating. Poirot's preliminary analysis. As the interviews concluded, Poirot sat in contemplative silence, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. The testimonies had provided crucial pieces of a complex puzzle, revealing a web of contradictions and suspicious circumstances. Inspector, he said finally, we are dealing with someone who possesses intimate knowledge of hotel operations, access to restricted areas, and considerable skill in forgery. Most importantly, they demonstrate a theatrical sensibility. This crime was designed not merely to eliminate Monsieur Thornfield, but to create a mystery that would confound conventional investigation. The facts formed a disturbing pattern. A visitor who never appeared through conventional means, a message sent by a dead man, a room cleaned with impossible thoroughness, missing linens that suggested body transport, foreign cologne indicating an unexpected presence, and a service lift unlocked by someone with authorized access. The psychology of this crime, Poirot murmured, suggests not passion but calculation. Someone has orchestrated events with theatrical precision, creating an illusion of impossibility while concealing a perfectly logical sequence of cause and effect. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the hotel's elegant facade, Poirot prepared for the next phase of his investigation. The morning's interviews had established the framework of deception. Now came the more delicate task of understanding which among the assembled suspects possessed both the means and the motive to transform the Majestic Palace Hotel into a stage for murder. The afternoon brought developments that seemed to transform an impossible mystery into a straightforward case of greed and murder. Inspector Meadows entered the hotel manager's office with the satisfied expression of a man who believed he had finally wrestled order from chaos, brandishing a telegram that would, he was certain, provide the key to unlocking the entire puzzle. The Victoria Station connection. Poirot, we've found our breakthrough, Meadows announced, consulting his notes with obvious satisfaction. At 12 minutes past midnight, a man deposited 2 items at Victoria Station's left luggage office, a leather valise and a flat case bound in brown calf. He gave the name R. Thornfield, signed the ledger with a firm hand, and departed with the claim ticket. The attendant, Mr. Higgins, remembered him distinctly because of his sharp foreign cologne and a distinctive signet ring engraved with a harlequin's mask. Poirot's eyebrows rose with polite interest, though his expression remained thoughtfully reserved. "Most illuminating, mon ami. And this signet ring, it suggests a particular individual." "Indeed it does. Julian Harcourt wears precisely such a ring, and his story about purchasing a newspaper doesn't hold water. The newsstand vendor on Piccadilly remembers him clearly, not because he bought the Star at 12:30 as claimed, but because he attempted to purchase it at 11:15 and was told the evening edition wouldn't arrive until midnight." Building the case. With characteristic determination, Inspector Meadows had obtained Mr. Whitmore's permission to search Harcourt's suite. The antiquities dealer watched with the bland composure of a man who had experienced such examinations before, his eyes hooded, expression faintly amused. "I do trust the Metropolitan Police will not misplace anything," Harcourt murmured with urbane calm. "Certain objects in my possession are not easily replaced." The search proved remarkably productive. In the inner pocket of Harcourt's beautifully tailored overcoat, Meadows discovered a narrow rectangle of blue card, a left luggage claim ticket stamped Victoria, its number corresponding exactly to the midnight deposit. For the first time, Harcourt's composure wavered slightly. "That is not mine," he said evenly, hands spread in a pacifying gesture. "You are being played, Inspector." More damning evidence emerged from beneath the writing desk blotter. A folded slip of hotel notepaper upon which someone had practiced the phrase "account settled" 3 times. The letters formed with patient care, the slant corrected, the capital S redrawn twice. The Continental evidence. Poirot, who had been quietly examining Harcourt's dressing table, lifted a small glass flask to the light. The label was Continental. The scent, when opened, was bright and unmistakably citrus with a faint bitter undertone, matching young Elsie's description of the foreign cologne detected near room 507. "You favor this particular cologne, monsieur?" Poirot observed mildly. "It leaves a distinctive signature wherever you travel." The search of the service areas yielded additional evidence supporting the Harcourt theory. Constable Fry discovered a torn corner from a bath sheet, stained with brown beeswax that Mrs. Llewellyn identified as Continental rather than the hotel's standard Wright & Sons polish. In the cleaning supply storeroom, Poirot's fingertips found tacky residue behind a stack of canvas covers, expensive beeswax that smelled of honey and resin. Geoffrey Blackwood, appearing in the storeroom doorway with a guilty flush rising from his collar to his hairline, attempted to explain. "I occasionally import better polish for the brass, particularly the 5th floor. We are judged on our gleam, sir. I didn't inform Mrs. Llewellyn because I wished the glory without the paperwork." Inspector Meadows' reconstruction. The inspector laid out his theory with growing confidence. The motive is crystal clear. Harcourt's antiquities business faces bankruptcy. His creditors include unsavory Continental collectors who don't accept excuses. The Codex Aureus represented salvation, but Thornfield refused to sell or demanded too high a price. Meadows paced as he developed his reconstruction. Harcourt arranged a private meeting, used his intimate knowledge of the hotel's layout to avoid detection, murdered Thornfield in the service lift, then staged the elaborate checkout deception to buy time for establishing his alibi and removing evidence. When the claim ticket led police to Victoria Station, they recovered both the leather valise and the flat manuscript case. The valise contained Thornfield's personal effects and scholarly correspondence, including heated exchanges with Dr. Sabine Vale about the Codex's authenticity. The manuscript case, however, was completely empty. "You see," Harcourt observed quietly as the empty case was examined, "if I had removed a priceless manuscript, would I deliver you the empty box like a conjurer showing his hat?" Or, Meadows countered, "Did you intend to retrieve the contents later while investigation focused on the hotel? You made certain we would find the empty case to support your innocence." Poirot's methodical skepticism. Despite the mounting evidence, Poirot remained curiously unmoved by the inspector's triumphant presentation. He sat quietly, fingers drumming an almost inaudible rhythm against the leather desk surface, his green eyes focused on some point beyond the assembled group. "The evidence you present, mon ami, is indeed compelling," Poirot said finally, his tone carefully measured. "Yet permit me to observe certain psychological inconsistencies that trouble the orderly mind." Rising to pace with characteristic precision, Poirot began his systematic analysis. "Consider the profile of our supposed murderer. Monsieur Harcourt, as you describe him, is simultaneously desperate enough to commit murder for financial salvation, yet sophisticated enough to orchestrate elaborate theatrical deception. Such combination of desperation and calculation suggests either genius or madness, qualities that rarely coexist in the criminal mind. The technical contradictions. Furthermore," Poirot continued, "examine the technical aspects. The service lift requires specific operational knowledge, weight limitations, mechanical timing, safety protocols. Mrs. Llewellyn confirms it is temperamental, requiring precise lever sequences. Yet our murderer operated it flawlessly, while supposedly in a state of panic after committing murder." Most troubling to Poirot was the checkout message itself. Studying it again through his jeweler's loupe, he addressed the group with growing intensity. "This handwriting demonstrates not the careful copying of a forger, but the unconscious muscle memory developed over decades of personal writing habits. Young Monsieur Ashford compared it meticulously to Thornfield's registry signature. They were identical in every particular." Which suggests, Poirot concluded, either supernatural forgery skill, or that the message was indeed written by Monsieur Thornfield himself, under circumstances we do not yet comprehend. The arrest and lingering doubts. Despite Poirot's reservations, Inspector Meadows proceeded with Harcourt's arrest. The antiquities dealer received the charges with curious resignation, neither outraged innocence nor defiant confession, but weary acceptance of an expected development. "I suppose my creditors will be disappointed," Harcourt observed as handcuffs were applied, "though I suspect they'll recover their equilibrium more quickly than I will recover mine." As Harcourt was led away, Poirot stood at the window overlooking Hyde Park, his reflection ghost-like in the afternoon glass. The case appeared solved, the impossible mystery reduced to ordinary human greed, yet something in the Belgian detective's manner suggested profound dissatisfaction with this resolution. The deeper pattern. "Inspector," Poirot said quietly, "permit me to suggest that while Monsieur Harcourt may indeed be guilty of certain indiscretions, the murder of Reginald Thornfield is not among them." Meadows paused, his confidence slightly shaken. "What makes you so certain?" "The pocket watch, mon ami. It stopped at 12:23, yet continued ticking until morning. Someone wound it after Thornfield's death. But Harcourt's alleged timeline places him establishing his newspaper alibi at precisely that moment. Either he possesses the ability to be in two places simultaneously, or we have arrested the wrong man." Poirot examined the resewn seam in Thornfield's valise, his fingers tracing the meticulous needlework. "Observe the vanity in the stitching. Neat to the point of obsession. The crime exhibits not desperation, but artistic precision. The room cleaned with theatrical perfection, the watch chain coiled with ceremonial exactitude, the message delivered through mechanical systems with perfect timing. The true nature of the crime." "This murder, Inspector, is not the work of a desperate dealer facing bankruptcy. It is a psychological masterpiece designed to create the illusion of impossibility while concealing perfectly logical cause and effect. Someone has orchestrated events with theatrical precision, scattering evidence like breadcrumbs, continental cologne, foreign beeswax, practice handwriting sheets, knowing how pleasantly they would lead conventional investigation astray." As evening shadows lengthened across the hotel's elegant facade, Poirot prepared for the next phase of his investigation. The arrest of Julian Harcourt had satisfied conventional police procedure and provided the press with a satisfying resolution to an impossible mystery. Yet the little grey cells of Hercule Poirot detected patterns and inconsistencies that suggested the true criminal remained at large, someone who understood not merely the mechanics of murder, but the psychology of misdirection itself. The majestic Palace Hotel settled into an uneasy quiet, its staff and remaining guests believing that justice had been served, yet somehow sensing that the final act of this particular drama had yet to be performed. In his temporary office, Poirot sat contemplating the evidence that had convinced everyone else, knowing that the most dangerous phase of the investigation was yet to come, the moment when the real murderer, believing themselves safe behind their elaborate deception, would finally reveal the fatal flaw that would lead to their exposure. The arrest of Julian Harcourt had settled over the majestic Palace Hotel like a deceptive calm, yet Hercule Poirot remained profoundly unsatisfied with this convenient resolution. The little Belgian detective understood that the most dangerous criminals were those who possessed not merely the cunning to commit murder, but the theatrical sensibility to orchestrate their own exoneration by ensuring someone else would bear the blame. The art of psychological disturbance. With characteristic precision, Poirot began his campaign not through direct accusation, but through subtle disturbances, carefully calculated disruptions designed to reveal the psychological patterns that conventional investigation had overlooked. He requested the Palm Lounge once more, ostensibly for follow-up interviews, but his true purpose was far more sophisticated. Upon the central mahogany table, Poirot arranged 3 objects with deliberate imperfection: a silver cigarette box, placed slightly askew, a crystal ashtray positioned 2 degrees off-center, and a small bronze figure of a faun turned away from its natural alignment. Any hotel staff member would normally have corrected such disorder immediately. Yet Poirot left them precisely as placed and invited the remaining suspects to join him for what he termed clarification of certain details. The responses proved immediately illuminating. Lady Viola Martindale entered with aristocratic composure, her sable stole drawn close against the morning chill. Her cool blue eyes swept the room with practiced authority, lingering for just a moment on the misaligned cigarette box. Her gloved fingers tightened almost imperceptibly, yet she made no move to correct the disorder, the restraint of one accustomed to commanding others to maintain her environment. Dr. Sabine Vale approached with scholarly precision, setting her notebook down with geometric exactness. After the briefest pause, her hand moved unconsciously to nudge the crystal ashtray into perfect alignment with the table's grain, a gesture so automatic it revealed the deep psychological need for order that marked her academic nature. Most revealing was Mrs. Bronwen Llewellyn's reaction. The head housekeeper entered and immediately, with brisk efficiency, corrected all 3 objects in a single fluid motion. Only then did she seem to realize what she had done, her hands clasping together as color rose in her cheeks, the involuntary response of one whose professional identity was built upon maintaining perfect order. Geoffrey Blackwood's eyes skittered over the arrangement like a nervous bird, noting the disorder but making no move to correct it, though a muscle ticked at his jaw. Young Timothy Ashford appeared genuinely bewildered by the entire exercise, his confusion itself a form of testimony. "Forgive me," Poirot said with gentle courtesy. "An experiment, très minor, but not without value. You see, order and disorder are languages that some speak without conscious awareness. The way one responds to imperfection reveals the deepest patterns of the mind." The technical revelation. Poirot's next move involved the hotel's pneumatic message system, that brass-tubed network that connected each suite to the front desk like arteries in a mechanical body. With Timothy Ashford as guide, he examined the service corridor where the system's junction hub revealed its secrets. "This selector mechanism," Poirot observed, studying the small dial marked with neat black figures, It would permit someone with proper knowledge to send messages from the junction itself, no? Creating the illusion that they originated from a specific room. Timothy flushed with nervous energy. Technically possible, sir, though you'd need the proper key and understanding of the pressure sequences. Mr. Blackwood has me test the system weekly. The fifth-floor branch is particularly temperamental. Mrs. Llewellyn's keys chimed softly as she shifted position. Only senior staff possess access keys, and mine were secured throughout the evening. I verified their location at midnight precisely. Your habits are admirable, madame, Poirot replied warmly. It is in such small details that truth often reveals itself. The manuscript's secret. Returning to the matter of the Codex Aureus, Poirot engaged Dr. Vale in scholarly discussion that revealed crucial information about the manuscript's true nature. The authenticity questions you raised, Dr. Vale, they concerned specific technical aspects, did they not? Her response was immediate and precise. The palimpsest leaves showed clear evidence of 19th century interpolation. Any serious scholar would recognize the anachronistic elements immediately. For someone of Thornfield's reputation to ignore such obvious tampering suggested either willful blindness or deliberate deception. And the financial implications of such revelations? Catastrophic, she stated firmly. A manuscript revealed as partially fraudulent would lose perhaps 90% of its market value. Thornfield understood this perfectly. It was the source of our most heated disagreements. This information cast new light on the crime's motivation. Perhaps the murder had been committed not to steal the codex, but to prevent the exposure of its compromised authenticity. A revelation that would have destroyed not only its value, but the reputation of anyone associated with its authentication. Individual psychological pressure, so. With systematic precision, Poirot applied targeted pressure to each suspect, probing their specific vulnerabilities with the skill of a master psychologist. To Geoffrey Blackwood, he mentioned the continental beeswax found in the supply room, watching as the assistant manager's hands trembled while reaching for his teacup. Your initiative in importing superior polish, Poirot observed mildly. It demonstrates ambitious attention to detail. Yet Mrs. Llewellyn expressed surprise at this unauthorized improvement to her domain. Blackwood's flush was immediate. One cannot achieve advancement without occasionally exceeding prescribed responsibilities. I hoped to demonstrate my value to the hotel's operations. Or perhaps, Poirot suggested with deadly gentleness, you hope to demonstrate your intimate knowledge of hotel systems to certain interested parties who might reward such information handsomely. To Lady Viola, Poirot explored the social implications of Thornfield's public dismissal of her charitable foundation. When a man of his reputation questions one's judgment before London's collecting community, the wounds to pride heal slowly. No? Her aristocratic composure showed hairline cracks. I do not murder for social slights, Monsieur Poirot. My foundation has resources beyond the whims of individual donors. Yet the humiliation was public and complete. To be dismissed as provincial by someone whose own ethics were questionable. Such irony must have been particularly galling. The pocket watch revelation. Most significantly, Poirot returned to the crucial evidence of Thornfield's pocket watch, using it to expose the fundamental flaw in the accepted timeline. The watch stopped at 12:23 a.m., yet continued ticking until morning. Someone wound it after Thornfield's death. But why? The question hung in the air like incense, and Poirot observed each face with microscopic attention. It was then he detected it. A minute stiffening in one individual's expression, a quick glance toward the door, followed by a forced smile that failed to reach the eyes. Not guilt, but calculation, the look of someone suddenly realizing the true significance of his observation and rapidly reassessing their position. The psychological web. As the afternoon progressed, Poirot's systematic probing revealed a complex web of interconnected motives and opportunities. Each suspect possessed knowledge that extended beyond casual guest observation. Someone had studied the majestic palace's operations with professional thoroughness, understanding not merely procedures, but the psychology of its staff and the mechanical quirks of its systems. The pattern emerging was not one of desperate greed, but of calculated elimination. Someone had orchestrated Thornfield's death not to steal the Codex Aureus, but to prevent him from revealing devastating information about its authenticity. Information that would have destroyed careers, reputations, and financial prospects built upon the manuscript's supposed value. The trap is set. With characteristic foresight, Poirot arranged for a carefully calculated rumor to circulate among the hotel's closed circle that photographic evidence had been discovered among Thornfield's effects, evidence that would definitively identify any alterations to the manuscript. The reactions to this fabricated revelation would, he knew, expose the true murderer's identity through their involuntary responses to the threat of exposure. As evening shadows lengthened across Hyde Park, the psychological game entered its most dangerous phase. The real murderer, believing themselves safe behind their elaborate deception, was about to make the fatal error that would expose their guilt. In the elegant surroundings of the majestic Palace Hotel, where luxury masked the darker human emotions, Hercule Poirot prepared for the final confrontation with a mind that had created what it believed to be the perfect crime. The little grey cells had identified their quarry. Now came the delicate task of forcing them into the open, where justice could finally be served. The violet shadows of dusk had barely settled over Hyde Park when Poirot's carefully orchestrated psychological experiment reached its inevitable crescendo. The Belgian detective had spent the afternoon observing his suspects with the methodical attention of a master chess player, watching his opponents contemplate their increasingly limited options. To Lady Viola, he had whispered of photographic plates sealed in evidence envelopes. To Dr. Sabine Vale, he had mentioned negatives revealing telltale abrasion marks. To Geoffrey Blackwood, seemingly as an afterthought, he had noted prints secured in Mr. Whitmore's safe. Magnification reveals everything, does it not? Each carefully crafted variation was designed to pull a different thread of curiosity and fear, and Poirot positioned himself in the manager's office with a clear view of the hotel's main arteries, waiting for the inevitable reaction. The desperate gambit. At 9:15 precisely, young Timothy Ashford's voice echoed through the corridors with undisguised alarm. "Mr. Poirot, Inspector Meadows, come quickly. It's Dr. Vale." The urgency in his tone sent both men hurrying toward the 5th floor, where they found the night clerk standing in the doorway of room 509, his face pale as hotel linen. Dr. Sabine Vale sat slumped in the room's elegant armchair, conscious but clearly disoriented, her wire-rimmed spectacles askew and her usually precise academic demeanor replaced by confused vulnerability. Her scholarly notebook lay open on the floor beside her, several pages torn out with deliberate precision. The room itself told a story of systematic searching, books examined and replaced with professional care, papers sorted according to academic methodology, her traveling case repacked with meticulous attention to detail. "Someone was here," Dr. Vale managed, her voice thick and unsteady. "I was reviewing my notes when I heard a sound from the corridor. When I went to investigate, someone pressed a cloth over my face. It smelled sweet, medicinal. The next thing I remember was waking up in this chair." Inspector Meadows knelt beside her, noting the telltale signs. "Chloral hydrate, I'd say. Professional application. Enough to render you unconscious without permanent harm. The work of someone with medical or pharmaceutical knowledge." The physical evidence. While Meadows attended to Dr. Vale, Poirot conducted his own examination with characteristic precision. Near the writing desk, his keen eyes detected a minute fragment no larger than a grain of rice, a shard of highly polished, dark material with a distinctive sweet, resinous scent that he immediately recognized. Continental beeswax polish. he murmured, carefully collecting the fragment with his jeweler's tweezers. The same expensive variety that Monsieur Blackwood admitted to importing for the hotel's brass fixtures and identical to what young Elsie detected near room 507. More significantly, Dr. Vale's research materials had been selectively targeted. Her photographic equipment remained intact, but specific glass plates were missing, those containing images of the manuscript pages in question. Her correspondence with European scholars was untouched, yet a single folder marked Codex Authentication had vanished completely. "Observe," Poirot said to Inspector Meadows, "how our criminal reveals themselves through this attack. The precise dosage of chloral hydrate, the surgical removal of specific evidence, the scholarly understanding of which materials pose the greatest threat, these details narrow our field of suspects considerably." The revelation of the gambit. As Dr. Vale recovered her composure with academic resilience, Poirot made a calculated revelation that sent ripples of understanding through the assembled group. "Dr. Vale, I must confess that the photographic evidence I mentioned, the plates supposedly in Mr. Whitmore's safe, they were a fabrication, a psychological trap designed to provoke precisely this reaction." The implications struck her immediately. "You mean Thornfield never possessed such photographs? The evidence I was supposedly competing with, it never existed?" "Précisément, madame. The murderer, believing such evidence existed, panicked. They knew that you, as Thornfield's academic rival, would be the most likely person to either possess such proof yourself or know where he might have concealed it. This hasty, desperate attack is the reaction of a mind pushed beyond careful planning into reactive fear. The pattern emerges. The attack on Dr. Vale represented a crucial shift in the criminal's methodology. Where the first crime had been orchestrated with theatrical precision and patient calculation, this second act was born of desperation and fear. The murderer had abandoned their careful planning in favor of immediate damage control, and in doing so had revealed crucial aspects of their identity. "Someone with intimate knowledge of hotel operations," Poirot enumerated, pacing with measured steps. "Access to restricted areas and specialized supplies, medical or pharmaceutical knowledge sufficient to calculate precise dosages, and scholarly training adequate to recognize which evidence posed the greatest threat to their deception." The continental beeswax fragment provided a direct link to the hotel's internal operations. Only senior staff possessed access to the supply rooms where such materials were stored, and the expensive imported polish had been Geoffrey Blackwood's unauthorized initiative to demonstrate his value to the establishment. The psychological breakthrough. Most revealing was the attack's timing and methodology. The criminal had waited until evening when the hotel's routines were established and staff movements predictable. They had used the service corridors with confidence, suggesting intimate familiarity with the building's layout. The chloral hydrate had been administered with professional precision, indicating either medical training or pharmaceutical access. The psychology of this second crime, Poirot observed, reveals someone whose entire professional reputation depends upon the Codex Aureus maintaining its authenticity. Not merely financial ruin awaited exposure, but complete professional destruction, the end of a carefully constructed career built upon scholarly credentials and institutional trust. The narrowing circle. As the evening progressed and Dr. Vale was settled comfortably under medical supervision, Poirot assembled the remaining suspects in the Palm Lounge. The attack had fundamentally altered the investigation's dynamics, forcing the murderer from calculated patience into reactive desperation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Poirot began with quiet authority, "tonight's events have provided the final pieces of our puzzle. The attack on Dr. Vale was not random violence, but the desperate action of someone who believed their elaborate deception was about to be exposed by photographic evidence that existed only in my imagination." Geoffrey Blackwood's hands trembled slightly as he reached for his teacup, a fine sheen of perspiration visible on his forehead despite the evening's coolness. Mrs. Llewellyn sat with professional composure, though her keys chimed softly with each slight movement. Lady Viola maintained her aristocratic bearing, yet her gloved fingers worried at her sable stole with unconscious anxiety. The continental beeswax, the precise medical knowledge, the scholarly understanding of manuscript authentication, the intimate familiarity with hotel operations, these elements point to someone who possessed not merely opportunity, but the specific expertise necessary to orchestrate both crimes with such calculated precision. The final gambit. With characteristic foresight, Poirot made one final announcement designed to force the murderer's hand. I should mention that Dr. Vale, before her unfortunate encounter this evening, had already shared her complete analysis with Scotland Yard. The photographic evidence may have been my fabrication, but her scholarly conclusions about the Codex's fraudulent nature are quite real and thoroughly documented. The reaction was immediate and telling. One individual's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, not the shock of the innocent, but the calculation of someone rapidly reassessing their position and considering their remaining options. It was the look of a mind that had orchestrated one impossible crime and was now contemplating whether another might be necessary. In the elegant surroundings of the majestic Palace Hotel, where luxury had masked the darker human emotions of ambition, greed, and murder, the final act was about to begin. The psychological trap had worked perfectly, forcing the murderer from careful concealment into desperate action, and in doing so, providing Hercule Poirot with the crucial evidence needed to expose the truth behind the impossible crime. The little grey cells had identified their quarry through the criminal's own desperate attempt to silence the truth. Now came the moment for the final revelation, when all deceptions would be stripped away and justice would finally be served. The first pale light of dawn found Hercule Poirot in the hotel manager's office, surrounded by an array of seemingly insignificant objects that would, when properly understood, expose the elaborate deception that had transformed the majestic Palace Hotel into a stage for murder. The attack on Dr. Vale had served its purpose, forcing the murderer from calculated patience into desperate action, and in doing so, revealing the crucial patterns that conventional investigation had overlooked. The mechanical heart of deception. Poirot's investigation began with the hotel's most modern marvel, the electric indicator board that displayed room occupancy status. Summoning the chief engineer, a taciturn man whose grimy hands spoke of intimate familiarity with the building's mechanical systems, Poirot requested access to the service corridors behind the 5th floor. The manual override system, Poirot observed, studying the brass switches and rotary selector concealed within a narrow cupboard. It would permit someone with proper knowledge to manipulate the board's display norm, to show room 507 as vacant while the guest remained very much in residence. The engineer nodded reluctantly. Only senior staff possess keys, sir. The system requires precise understanding of the electrical sequences. One wrong setting could disable the entire floor's indicators. With his jeweler's loupe, Poirot examined the bakelite control grip with microscopic attention. There, barely visible to the naked eye, was a translucent residue that caught the morning light, the distinctive, sweet, resinous perfume of continental beeswax. "Someone has operated this mechanism recently," he murmured, "and they have done so with hands accustomed to polishing brass with expensive imported materials." The pneumatic. Revelation. The hotel's pneumatic message system revealed equally damning evidence. In the junction hub, where brass tubes converged like arteries in a mechanical body, Poirot discovered minute brass filings, evidence of deliberate modification performed with professional precision. "Observe these microscopic alterations," Poirot explained to Inspector Meadows, indicating almost invisible scratches on the pressure dial. "Someone has adjusted the system to allow messages to be sent from this central location while creating the electronic signature of room 507. This required not merely access and opportunity, but intimate technical knowledge developed through years of working with these temperamental mechanisms. Young Timothy Ashford, when consulted, confirmed the sophistication required. "The fifth-floor branch has always been troublesome, sir. It demands precise pressure sequences and timing that only someone who services the system regularly would understand well enough to manipulate so subtly." The Continental Connection. The trail of expensive beeswax led Poirot to a revelation that connected the crime to European antiquities networks. Chemical analysis of the residue, conducted with equipment borrowed from Dr. Vale's scholarly kit, revealed a composition unique to Bavarian artisans: honey-scented wax mixed with alpine tree resins, available only through specialized continental suppliers. Import records obtained through official channels showed that this particular polish had been ordered by only one individual in London within recent months. Someone who had paid premium prices for what they described as materials for professional restoration work. The expense suggested not casual use, but professional necessity for someone whose reputation depended upon maintaining the finest standards in their craft. The psychological pattern. Most revealing was the contrast between the two crimes' methodologies. The first, Thornfield's murder and the impossible checkout, had been orchestrated with theatrical precision, every detail calculated to create an aura of supernatural impossibility. The room cleaned to perfection, the watch chain coiled with ceremonial exactitude, the message delivered through mechanical systems with perfect timing. The second crime, the attack on Dr. Vale, revealed desperation and improvisation. The chloral hydrate, while administered with professional skill, represented a departure from the elaborate planning that had characterized the original murder. The murderer, Poirot observed, has revealed themselves through this psychological shift from artistic calculation to reactive fear. The authentication conspiracy. Dr. Vale's research materials, examined with her permission, revealed the broader context that provided the true motive. The Codex Aureus was not merely questionably authentic, it was the centerpiece of a sophisticated fraud that would have cheated collectors of hundreds of thousands of pounds. Correspondence with European scholars showed growing consensus that the manuscript contained significant 19th-century interpolations. Hidden within Thornfield's personal effects, sewn with obsessive precision into his valise lining, Poirot discovered authentication documents in the antiquarian's own handwriting. These papers acknowledged the Codex's compromised nature while recommending its sale to collectors who value legend over strict provenance. Monsieur Thornfield was not merely a victim, Poirot revealed with quiet gravity. He was a willing participant in a fraud who had become a liability when scholarly pressure threatened to expose the conspiracy. His murder was committed not to steal the Codex, but to silence him before he could confess and destroy everyone associated with the authentication. The convergence of evidence. As Poirot assembled these discoveries, a clear pattern emerged, pointing to someone whose entire professional existence depended upon the intersection of technical precision and scholarly credibility. The murderer possessed intimate knowledge of the hotel's mechanical systems, access to specialized European materials, the technical skills to modify precision mechanisms, and most crucially, a reputation that would be utterly destroyed by exposure of the Codex fraud. In room 507, Poirot's final examination revealed the most damning evidence of all. Beneath the writing desk's leather blotter, invisible to casual inspection, lay a single thread of white cotton with a pale blue tracer. Not garment thread, but the specialized material used in institutional linens. The thread matched samples from the hotel's own supply stores, linking the crime directly to someone with access to housekeeping materials. The watch's true secret. Thornfield's pocket watch, examined with renewed attention, revealed its most significant secret. The timepiece bore microscopic traces of the same continental beeswax found throughout the crime scene, concentrated around the winding mechanism where careful hands had manipulated it after the murder. The watch had been deliberately positioned and wound to continue ticking until morning, not to establish a false timeline, but to create a psychological impact that would enhance the crime's impossible nature. The handwriting analysis. Most tellingly, Poirot's analysis of the checkout message revealed a crucial linguistic pattern. While the handwriting was authentically Thornfield's, formed by muscle memory developed over decades, the phrasing was distinctly institutional rather than personal. Account settled was not the language a gentleman of Thornfield's education would employ, but rather the terminology of hotel administration, accounting departments, and professional service industry. The final realization. The individual we seek, Poirot announced with quiet certainty, is someone who has spent years mastering the intricate systems of this establishment, who possesses the technical knowledge to manipulate mechanical devices with professional precision, and whose entire career has been built upon maintaining standards of perfection that extend from brass fixtures to scholarly authentication. The murderer was not a desperate antiquities dealer or a vengeful academic, but someone whose professional identity was so intertwined with the hotel's operations and the manuscript's perceived value that exposure of the fraud would mean complete personal and professional annihilation. They had created what they believed to be the perfect crime, an impossible mystery that would protect their reputation behind a veil of supernatural impossibility. Setting the final trap. With characteristic foresight, Poirot arranged for one final test. He requested that a linen cart be positioned in the Palm Lounge at precisely 1 o'clock, ostensibly for inventory purposes, but actually to observe who would react with professional instinct to its placement and condition. The murderer's compulsive need for order and precision would, he knew, betray them in this final moment. As morning shadows shifted across the hotel's elegant facade, Poirot prepared for the ultimate confrontation. The hidden clues had revealed not merely the identity of the murderer, but the sophisticated psychology of someone who had transformed murder into performance art. The little gray cells had assembled their evidence, connecting technical expertise with psychological compulsion, European connections with institutional knowledge, and most importantly, the desperate need to preserve a reputation built upon a foundation of carefully maintained deceptions. The final gathering awaited, where all masks would be removed and the truth would finally emerge from behind the elaborate theatrical production that had made the majestic Palace Hotel the stage for what its perpetrator had believed would be the perfect crime. The afternoon light streaming through the Palm Lounge's tall windows cast long shadows across Persian carpets that had witnessed many secrets, but none quite so intricate as the web of deception Hercule Poirot was about to unravel. The elegant room had been transformed into an amphitheater of justice, its imported palms and crystal fixtures bearing silent witness to what would become one of the Belgian detective's most methodical revelations. The Assembly of Truth. Inspector Meadows occupied a leather armchair with the satisfied bearing of a man who believed the case concluded with Harcourt's arrest, yet his expression betrayed subtle unease at Poirot's insistence on this gathering. Julian Harcourt himself sat with sardonic composure, his recent release from custody lending him the air of a man vindicated yet curious about the drama still to unfold. The hotel staff formed a precise group near the body's windows. Mr. Whitmore maintaining managerial dignity despite the strain, young Timothy Ashford clutching his ever-present notepad with ink-stained fingers, Thomas Hartwell standing at respectful attention with the bearing of one who had observed much while remaining nearly invisible. Mrs. Bronwyn Llewellyn sat with professional composure, her ring of keys unusually silent, while Geoffrey Blackwood perched on the edge of his chair with nervous energy. Among the remaining guests, Lady Viola Martindale maintained her aristocratic bearing, though her gloved fingers betrayed tension as they worried the clasp of her handbag. Dr. Sabine Vale, still pale from her ordeal but intellectually alert, sat with scholarly precision, her wire-rimmed spectacles reflecting the afternoon light as she prepared to witness the exposure of academic fraud. The Theatre of Evidence. Mesdames et Messieurs, Poirot began, his accented English carrying the authority of absolute certainty. We gather to examine a crime that was designed not merely to eliminate Monsieur Thornfield, but to create a mystery so impossible that conventional investigation would exhaust itself pursuing supernatural explanations, while the true criminal remained safely concealed behind their elaborate theatrical deception. Upon the central mahogany table, Poirot had arranged his evidence with characteristic precision. A stoppered flask of continental beeswax polish, a length of institutional cotton bearing the pale blue tracer of hotel linens, Thornfield's pocket watch beneath a crystal dome, the brass selector dial cap removed from the pneumatic system's junction hub, and most intriguingly, a linen cart positioned nearby with towels folded in deliberate imperfection. "Observe this collection," Poirot continued, his green eyes encompassing the entire assembly. Each item speaks a language of technical expertise, professional access, and psychological compulsion that conventional investigation overlooked in favor of more obvious explanations. The systematic deconstruction. With methodical precision, Poirot began dismantling the crime's elaborate construction. The electric indicator board that showed room 507 as vacant while our victim remained very much in residence. This illusion required manual override of sophisticated electrical systems. The control mechanism bears microscopic traces of expensive Bavarian beeswax, honey-scented and mixed with alpine resins, available only through specialized continental suppliers. He lifted the brass component with jeweler-like delicacy. The pneumatic message system that delivered Monsieur Thornfield's apparent checkout note was manipulated from the central junction hub, not from room 507 itself. The modifications showed tool marks matching professional maintenance equipment, and the operation required intimate knowledge of pressure sequences that only someone who services these temperamental mechanisms regularly would possess. Timothy Ashford leaned forward with professional interest. "The fifth-floor pneumatic branch has always been troublesome, sir. It demands precise understanding of timing and pressure that takes years to master." "Précisément, mon ami." The message itself, while bearing Monsieur Thornfield's authentic handwriting, employed institutional phrasing, account settled, that reveals the unconscious linguistic patterns of hotel administration rather than private correspondence. The technical mastery. Poirot's analysis revealed the sophisticated knowledge required for each aspect of the deception. The service lift, normally secured after evening rounds, was operated with professional precision despite its temperamental nature. Someone understood its weight limitations, mechanical timing, and safety protocols well enough to transport a body without mechanical failure or operational noise that would alert night staff. Mrs. Llewellyn's keys chimed softly as she shifted position, her expression remaining carefully neutral. The room cleaning achieved perfection that transcended mere concealment. It represented artistic compulsion, every surface spotless, bed prepared as if for a new guest, bathroom towels replaced with unused ones. This meticulous attention suggests not panic, but the psychological need for order that extends from professional responsibility into personal identity. The Continental Connection. The expensive beeswax found throughout the crime scene was imported specifically for restoration work requiring museum-quality materials. Import records reveal this polish was ordered by someone who described their profession as cultural preservation specialist, indicating expertise that extends beyond hotel maintenance into scholarly conservation. Dr. Vale's eyebrows rose with academic interest. Such materials are used primarily in manuscript preservation and authentication work. Indeed, madame, Someone whose professional reputation depended not merely on maintaining hotel standards, but on scholarly credibility within the antiquities community. Someone whose entire career was built upon the intersection of technical precision and cultural authentication. The psychological test. Poirot moved toward the deliberately disordered linen cart with theatrical precision. There are reflexes that betray us more completely than conscious confession. Observe how I have arranged these towels, folded with deliberate imperfection, placed with calculated disorder that would offend anyone whose professional identity demands absolute precision. The silence that followed was electric with tension. Each person present felt the weight of observation, knowing that their unconscious responses were being catalogued by a mind capable of reading psychology like printed text. Lady Martindale will never bend to correct linen. She commands others to maintain her environment. Dr. Vale will note the imperfection, but abstain. She is a scholar, not a keeper of domestic order. Young Monsieur Ashford sees but does not presume to touch what is not his responsibility. Poirot's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Yet among us sits someone for whom such disorder represents not mere untidiness, but a violation of the fundamental principles that have governed their entire professional existence. Someone whose compulsive need for perfection extends from brass fixtures to murder itself. The motive revealed. The Codex Aureus, Poirot announced with quiet finality, was never stolen because theft was never the motive. The manuscript was destroyed because its continued existence, once exposed as a sophisticated 19th-century forgery, would have utterly ruined the reputation of anyone associated with its authentication. He produced the authentication documents found sewn into Thornfield's valise lining. Monsieur Thornfield possessed evidence of the fraud and had become a liability when scholarly pressure threatened to expose the conspiracy. His murder was committed to silence him before he could confess and destroy everyone associated with the authentication. The attack on Dr. Vale revealed the murderers' desperation when they believed my fabricated photographic evidence would complete the exposure. The precise dosage of chloral hydrate, the selective removal of specific research materials, the scholarly understanding of which documents pose the greatest threat, all indicate someone whose expertise encompasses both medical knowledge and academic authentication. The narrowing circle. As Poirot's systematic analysis continued, the psychological pressure in the room became almost tangible. Each revelation eliminated possibilities, narrowed focus, and built inexorably toward a conclusion that seemed both inevitable and shocking. We seek someone whose entire professional identity was built upon the intersection of technical mastery and scholarly credibility. Someone who possessed not merely access to the hotel's systems, but intimate understanding developed through years of professional responsibility. Someone whose reputation would be completely destroyed by exposure of the Codex fraud. Not merely financial ruin, but the annihilation of a carefully constructed legacy. The afternoon shadows lengthened across the elegant room as Poirot's voice took on the intensity of absolute revelation. Someone who had become so invested in maintaining the appearance of perfection that they transformed murder itself into a performance of impossible precision, believing that supernatural mystery would protect them more effectively than conventional concealment. The final tension. The individual we seek is in this room, Poirot declared with quiet certainty, his eyes moving systematically across each face, noting the subtle variations in expression, the minute changes in posture, the involuntary responses that revealed more than words ever could. They are someone whose professional life has been defined by meticulous order, technical precision, and an almost obsessive attention to detail. Someone who commands intimate knowledge of every system in this establishment, from pneumatic tubes and electrical indicators to linen stores and service lifts. Someone whose ambition led them to become deeply entangled in authenticating a fraudulent manuscript, and whose entire identity would be irrevocably destroyed by exposure of that fraud. The silence that followed was profound, electric with unspoken accusations and barely contained tension. Each person present understood that they were witnessing the final moments before revelation, when all masks would be removed and the truth would emerge from behind the elaborate theatrical production that had transformed the majestic Palace Hotel into a stage for what its perpetrator had believed would be the perfect crime. "In 5 minutes," Poirot announced with ceremonial precision, "we shall adjourn to room 507 where this performance began. There, in the scene of the original deception, we shall witness the final act of this particular drama." The linen cot stood as silent testimony to the psychological forces that would, in moments, compel the murderer to reveal themselves through the very compulsions that had driven them to commit the perfect crime. In the elegant palm lounge, where luxury had masked the darker human emotions of ambition and desperation, justice prepared to emerge through the relentless application of logic to seemingly impossible circumstances. Room 507 stood in pristine perfection, yet it seemed to pulse with the memory of impossible events, a testament to the theatrical sensibility of someone who had transformed murder into performance art. The afternoon light streaming through tall windows illuminated the mahogany writing desk where Thornfield's pocket watch continued its mechanical rhythm, counting moments toward the revelation that would expose the most sophisticated deception in Hercule Poirot's considerable experience. The final theater. The assembled group entered with the gravity of witnesses to history. Inspector Meadows positioned himself with official authority near the door, while Julian Harcourt observed with the detached curiosity of one whose innocence had been established. Lady Viola Martindale maintained her aristocratic composure by the windows. Dr. Sabine Vale occupied her scholarly position beside the writing desk, and the hotel staff arranged themselves with professional precision. Geoffrey Blackwood perched nervously on an armchair's edge, his usually immaculate appearance showing subtle signs of strain. Most notably, Mrs. Bronwen Llewellyn sat with characteristic composure, though her ring of keys remained unusually silent, and her watchful grey eyes betrayed a tension that spoke of mounting psychological pressure. The methodical revelation. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty, "we stand in the chamber where theatrical impossibility was created to conceal perfectly logical cause and effect. The individual who orchestrated these events possessed not merely criminal cunning, but artistic sensibility. They understood that mystery itself could become their most effective protection." Moving with characteristic precision, Poirot approached Thornfield's pocket watch. This timepiece reveals the psychology of someone whose compulsive need for order extended from professional responsibility into murder itself. Observe how the chain is coiled with ceremonial exactitude. Such theatrical precision reveals someone who transformed murder into a statement of technical mastery. The technical mastery. With systematic precision, Poirot began exposing the expertise required for each deception. The electric indicator board showing this room as vacant required intimate knowledge of electrical systems. The pneumatic message system was controlled from the central hub through modifications showing professional tool marks. The service lift operation demanded understanding of mechanical temperaments developed through years of maintenance responsibility. He produced the brass component from the pneumatic junction. These systems are temperamental. Young Monsieur Ashford confirms the fifth-floor branch requires precise understanding that only someone who services these mechanisms regularly would possess. The Continental evidence. Throughout the crime scene, we find traces of expensive Bavarian beeswax, honey-scented polish mixed with alpine resins, available only through specialized Continental suppliers. Poirot held up the distinctive flask. Import records reveal this material was ordered for cultural preservation work, indicating expertise that extends beyond hotel maintenance into scholarly conservation. Mrs. Llewellyn's hands tightened almost imperceptibly at this revelation. The psychological pattern. The room cleaning that followed transcended mere concealment. It represented compulsive need for perfection applied to murder itself. Every surface spotless, bed prepared with geometric precision, towels replaced with obsessive attention to detail. This was not panic, but artistry. Poirot moved toward the deliberately disordered linen cart he had positioned in the room. There are reflexes that betray us more completely than conscious confession. I've arranged these towels with deliberate imperfection, calculated disorder that would offend anyone whose professional identity demands absolute precision. The compulsive revelation. The silence that followed was electric with tension. Poirot's green eyes swept the assembled group with microscopic attention, noting the subtle responses to his psychological test. "Mrs. Bronwyn Llewellyn," Poirot announced with quiet finality. "You have created what you believe to be the perfect crime, a mystery so impossible that conventional investigation would exhaust itself pursuing supernatural explanations while you remained safely concealed." The head housekeeper's carefully maintained composure showed the first hairline cracks, her professional mask beginning to slip under the weight of Poirot's relentless logic. The hidden identity. Your expertise in hotel operations provided access to every system used in the deception, but more significantly, your background extends far beyond housekeeping, does it not? The continental beeswax, the scholarly understanding of manuscript authentication, the precise knowledge of conservation techniques, these point to someone whose true expertise lies in cultural preservation. Mrs. Llewellyn's keys chimed softly as her hands trembled, the sound echoing through the silent room like a confession. 23 years ago, you came to the majestic palace not merely as a housekeeper, but as someone seeking to rebuild a reputation damaged by association with questionable authentications. Your meticulous attention to hotel order was not just professional pride. It was rehabilitation, proving your worth through visible perfection while secretly maintaining connections to the antiquities world. The motive. Exposed. The Codex Aureus was never stolen because theft was never the motive. You had been quietly providing authentication services to continental dealers, using your position at this prestigious establishment to lend credibility to your scholarly opinions. When Thornfield threatened to expose the manuscript's fraudulent nature, he endangered not merely your financial prospects, but your entire, carefully reconstructed identity. Poirot's voice carried the weight of complete understanding. You had spent decades building a reputation that extended far beyond housekeeping into the scholarly community. Exposure would have meant not just dismissal, but the complete destruction of the professional identity you had so carefully cultivated. The method revealed. You arranged to meet Thornfield privately, using your master keys to access his suite. The chloral hydrate, easily obtained through your antiquities connections, where such chemicals are used in conservation work, rendered him unconscious. Your institutional linen cart provided concealment for transporting the body to the service lift. The reconstruction was methodical and precise. The continental beeswax traces throughout the crime scene came from your own hands, stained from manuscript restoration work you continued to perform in secret. The missing bath sheets from your inventory were used to wrap and transport the body, then disposed of to eliminate evidence. The psychological compulsion. But it is your compulsive need for order that ultimately betrayed you. In the Palm Lounge, you automatically corrected the misaligned ashtray, an unconscious response revealing the deep psychological patterns that drove you to transform murder into performance art. Mrs. Llewellyn's professional mask finally collapsed completely. Her shoulders sagged as the weight of Poirot's systematic analysis crushed her elaborate deception. The final confession. "He would have destroyed everything," she whispered, her voice carrying the weight of years of carefully constructed deception. 23 years I worked to rebuild my reputation after the Munich incident. The authentication work, provided the scholarly respect I could never achieve through housekeeping alone. Her hands moved unconsciously to straighten a perfectly aligned picture frame, the gesture revealing the compulsive need for order that had driven her to murder. The codex represented everything I had worked to achieve. When Thornfield threatened to expose its fraudulent nature, he was threatening to destroy not just that manuscript, but my entire professional identity. I created what I believed was the perfect crime, a mystery so impossible that investigation would focus on supernatural explanations rather than examining the mundane reality of hotel operations and scholarly fraud. But I could not resist making it perfect, making it a statement of the technical mastery that had defined my entire existence. The autumn afternoon cast long shadows across the majestic Palace Hotel's elegant facade as Mrs. Bronwyn Llewellyn was led away with the measured dignity of one whose greatest tragedy had been the pursuit of perfection in an imperfect world. Her handcuffs gleamed with the same meticulous polish she had demanded of every brass fixture under her care, a final irony that was not lost on Hercule Poirot as he observed her departure from the Palm Lounge windows. The systematic explanation. Inspector Meadows, no longer defensive about his earlier arrest of Harcourt, approached Poirot with genuine curiosity. "You've given us the full machinery, Mr. Poirot. Let us have the sequence plainly." "Willingly, mon ami," Poirot replied, settling into his chair with characteristic precision. At 11:40, Mrs. Llewellyn slipped into the service corridor behind the 5th floor. Earlier that evening, she had delivered beneath Monsieur Thornfield's door a courteous printed express checkout instruction of her own invention, requesting that he copy the provided phrase onto hotel stationery and send it with his key at 11:47 precisely. Meadows leaned forward with interest. The phrasing, "account settled," was hers then. Précisément. The hand was his, but the language betrayed institutional thinking rather than personal correspondence. The spacing in the handwriting shows the strain of copying rather than natural composition. Monsieur Thornfield complied. An obedient guest in a great hotel often follows forms he assumes to be routine. Poirot's green eyes grew grave as he continued. She had already overridden the electric indicator board to display vacant, thus discouraging casual attention to the suite. At midnight, she gained entry with her master key, ostensibly about a small correction connected with the hotel's express arrangements. She had prepared a chloroform cloth, enough to cloud reason without endangering life initially. He was docile thereafter. And the service lift. She brought her familiar linen cart, a sight that excites no comment in hotel corridors, to mask their movement. In the service hall, she guided him as if to step within the temperamental lift. The mechanism, demanding precisely the sequence she knew from years of maintenance, was her instrument. The fall among the stacked linens, the strike against the iron brace. The angle, alas, explained the fatal injury. No blood, no obvious violence, merely the tragic result of calculated precision. The artistic touches. Meadows shook his head in reluctant admiration. And then she returned to perfect the scene. Indeed, with the stage prepared, she could not resist her compulsive artistry. Surfaces polished to perfection, the watch chain coiled with ceremonial exactitude. She wound the timepiece at 23 minutes past 12, a flourish for her imagined audience. The missing bath sheets concealed evidence of transport, while unused towels remained pristine. Every detail spoke to her psychological need for order, elevated to murderous art. The unraveling consequences. The revelation sent shockwaves through the hotel's carefully maintained hierarchy. Mr. Cornelius Whitmore stood in his office, surrounded by personnel files requiring complete reassessment, his usually precise demeanor shaken by the discovery that his most trusted employee had been living an elaborate double life for over 2 decades. 23 years of exemplary service, he murmured, adjusting his spectacles. The continental beeswax she claimed was for brass polishing, the scholarly correspondence she received under pretense of educational improvement. the occasional absences for professional conferences, all elements of a deception that transformed our establishment into a stage for academic rehabilitation. Julian Harcourt's vindication brought unexpected revelations about the Continental Antiquities network that had enabled Mrs. Llewellyn's double existence. His legitimate business dealings, initially viewed with suspicion, proved instrumental in exposing the broader authentication fraud. She was known in certain circles as the perfectionist, Harcourt explained with sardonic appreciation. Her authentication certificates carried premium value precisely because of her reputation for absolute precision. The majestic palace position provided the respectability that continental dealers required for their more questionable acquisitions. Character epilogues. Dr. Sabine Vale's recovery was complicated by professional implications, though her scholarly reputation was ultimately enhanced by her role in exposing the authentication conspiracy. The irony, she observed to Poirot, is that Mrs. Llewellyn's expertise was genuine, her technical knowledge considerable, her analysis sophisticated. Had she applied such skills honestly, she might have achieved the recognition she craved through legitimate means. Lady Viola Martindale's charity foundation, initially disrupted by Thornfield's withdrawal, ultimately benefited from the case's publicity. One might say, she observed with aristocratic irony, that Mrs. Llewellyn's theatrical sensibilities have served our cause better in exposure than Thornfield's cooperation ever could have in concealment. Geoffrey Blackwood received a stiff reprimand for his unauthorized importation of supplies, his ambitious plans complicated by the need to assume additional housekeeping responsibilities. Thomas Hartwell was discreetly rewarded with a raise and permanent privileges, while young Timothy Ashford, whose meticulous record-keeping had provided crucial evidence, found his attention to detail newly appreciated by management. The broader implications. The destroyed Codex Aureus, its ashes discovered in the hotel's basement furnace, represented not merely evidence elimination, but the symbolic destruction of Mrs. Llewellyn's carefully constructed academic identity. Chemical analysis confirmed that the manuscript had been systematically burned with the same meticulous attention that characterized every aspect of her professional life. Insurance claims were complicated by the manuscript's fraudulent nature, while several European collectors faced the uncomfortable reality that their acquisitions might require scholarly re-examination. The Munich incident, a long-forgotten scandal involving misattributed artifacts, was revisited, revealing connections to a then-junior conservator named Bronwen Llewellyn. Poirot's philosophical reflection. As evening settled over Hyde Park, Poirot found himself contemplating the psychological forces that had transformed dedication into elaborate murder. "The tragedy of Mrs. Llewellyn," he observed to Inspector Meadows, "lies not in her criminal actions, but in her fundamental misunderstanding of perfection itself. True perfection, mon ami, exists not in the elimination of flaws, but in the acceptance of human limitation within the pursuit of excellence." Meadows nodded thoughtfully. She made it all look like magic to seduce investigation away from mundane reality. To push men away with mystery, Poirot agreed. But the human heart remains very old, even when employing very modern methods of deception. The room that checked itself out was simply a room, used by a mind that understood how to manipulate perception through impossible theatricality. The restoration of order. In the weeks that followed, the majestic Palace Hotel gradually restored its reputation for elegant discretion. New staff were hired with enhanced verification, security procedures strengthened, and mechanical systems upgraded with modern safeguards against internal manipulation. The hotel's pneumatic system was rebuilt with additional security measures, while the electric indicator board received new override protections. Mr. Whitmore implemented protocols balancing operational efficiency with security awareness, observing that the pursuit of perfection while admirable in hospitality, becomes dangerous when it conceals the fundamental humanity that must underlie all professional relationships. The final justice. Mrs. Llewellyn's fate embodied a peculiar form of poetic justice. Her compulsive need for order, which had driven her to create the perfect crime, ultimately led to exposure through the very perfection she could not resist imposing upon her deception. At her sentencing, she maintained characteristic dignity, accepting her fate with the composure of one who understood that perfection, pursued beyond reasonable limits, becomes its own destruction. "I sought to create something perfect in an imperfect world," she stated to the court with typical precision. That such perfection could only be achieved through murder represents the fundamental tragedy of my existence. Poirot's final departure. As Poirot prepared to leave the majestic palace, he paused in the manager's office, noting the bronze faun on the mantel. With characteristic precision, he moved it 2 degrees off-center, studied it thoughtfully, then shook his head and set it perfectly square. "After all," he murmured to himself, "it is a hotel." Taking his hat from the stand and brushing an imaginary speck from the brim, the little Belgian detective stepped into the London evening with the measured tread of a man who, having put the world to rights in one small corner, would now seek an orderly dinner and an even more orderly creme caramel. Behind him, room 507 resumed its silent vigil, no longer an actor in someone else's theatrical production, but once more what it had always been. 4 walls, a bed, a desk, and a view of a city capable of containing even the strangest human passions without falling to pieces. The majestic Palace Hotel had survived its encounter with the impossible, its reputation ultimately enhanced by its association with one of Hercule Poirot's most methodical investigations. The case of the hotel room that checked itself out had concluded not with supernatural revelation, but with the triumph of methodical logic over theatrical impossibility, a testament to the eternal principle that no mystery, however artistically conceived, could ultimately withstand the systematic application of reason to the fundamental patterns of human psychology. The impossible had been reduced to the merely human, which is, after all, the field of Hercule Poirot, and his greatest triumph. As Inspector Meadows applied handcuffs with official precision, Mrs. Bronwyn Llewellyn maintained her dignity with the bearing of one whose greatest crime had been the pursuit of perfection in an imperfect world. The majestic Palace Hotel's head housekeeper had indeed created the perfect crime, perfect in its conception, perfect in its execution, and perfectly doomed by the very compulsions that had made it possible. In room 507, where impossible events had challenged the foundations of logic itself, Hercule Poirot had once again demonstrated that no mystery, however supernatural in appearance, could withstand the systematic application of reason to the eternal patterns of human psychology. The little grey cells had triumphed over theatrical impossibility, revealing that even the most elaborate deception must ultimately yield to the inexorable logic of cause and effect.